What's up, folks? Welcome to the live stream. How you guys doing tonight? I hope you're having a good night. And yeah, so I just found out that Novi, some of you guys may know Novi. A lot of you guys probably know Novi. She's always up in a lot of the different live streams, Bird Brains Reptiles. Her dad is having a medical thing where he cannot work, and so she's looking to sell some animals and also just help him out. There is a link down in the description to help her out as well. If you know Novi and you want to take a look, I just found out, but I just got it down there, so it's right down there. You want to check it out before we get this stream started, go for it. We've got on Mr. Robert Fisher tonight. If you didn't already know from the title that you clicked on, I met Robert at the Herpeton talks last year, and most of you guys that have been watching the channel for a while know that we put out most of the talks that happened at Herpeton we put out here on the channel. And when Philippe asked me to come do that and asked if I would be interested in doing it, I was like, yeah, it'd be great. And I could do little interviews for Triple B TV in between the talks as I'm filming them for you. And it just kind of worked out that there just wasn't enough time in between talks to do that. There was barely enough time to switch lav mics over to the next speaker, let alone have them sit over for a quick 10-15 minute interview like we always did on Triple B TV before. So Robert's the first person from those talks I've got to have on a live stream. So I'm really happy to have him here. I think I'm planning to learn a lot. I hope you guys will learn a lot as well, maybe even more than me. And you're watching Triple B TV. All right, Robert, how you doing, man? Thank you for being here tonight.
Doing fine, Brian. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you still work with USGS, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Good, because I have that up on the screen that you do.
Yes, I still work for USGS. It's been 22 years, going on 23 years. Yeah.
Wow. So for anybody that didn't watch the video that you gave a talk on Fiji iguanas and responsibility in herpetoculture, I'm thinking maybe we can expand on that, and maybe you can also educate me. Just pretend like I don't know anything. It's not going to be that hard because it's not that far from reality. Let me tell you a little bit what my first learnings of USGS was when the whole battle was happening with the Lacey Act and USARK doing that stuff. I remember a couple things coming up where USGS had done a map, and to me, at that point, I was like, okay, USGS is right there with HS as part of the enemy that we're fighting with USARK. And then I met a girl named Haley Crowell that worked with USGS in Florida. She came out and did a talk at one of our local herp meetings. And I was like, wait a minute, this girl's super cool. Like, this is not. And then you came and you were there invited by Philippe to do the talk there. I was like, wait, these guys. So can you tell me what you do at USGS?
Yeah. So I'm a research scientist at USGS, and so I got my I grew up in Southern California. I got my did all my college in Southern California, my PhD at UC Davis, and then was at UC San Diego. And then at that time, when I was doing my postdoc at UC San Diego, it was funded by what was called the National Biological Survey, and so that was an entity that was developed in the late 1800s to actually study the biological resources of the U.S., of the nation. And so that group was a science-based group to really understand what are the birds and the reptiles and the mammals and how might we utilize these resources across the country. And it came out of, it was based out of, in part, the Smithsonian. And so that group, the National Biological Survey, had just been redeveloped in the mid 90s by the Clinton administration, and had been absent for like 80 years, had been gone off the scene. And so they regenerated that, and I was being funded by that to do this postdoc and to study reptile resources in Southern California as it related to urbanization. And so I was being funded by that group, the National Biological Survey, to really understand in part horned lizards and orange-throated whiptails and things that are species, in some cases, that came up from Baja and barely occurred in Southern California. So then during my postdoc, the U.S. Congress took the National Biological Survey made it the service and then put it into the US Geological Survey. And they said within the Department of Interior and the US government, all of the science is going to go into the USGS. And so for the first time, there was like biological science in the USGS. And so then I was doing this postdoc and working for USGS at that point, being funded by them. And then when I finished the postdoc, I got hired by the US Geological Survey as a research biologist. And then over the last now 20 some years, plus years, it's become an integral part of the US Geological Survey. And I've been part of that, even though I'm a biologist. But historically, it was started by Congress to understand the resources of the nation, like the biological resources. That the history of the part of the USGS that I'm in is that. So that said, within USGS, within the ecosystems group, we do all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of my focus has been on conservation planning in Southern California and thinking about rare reptiles and amphibians in Southern California, and how does urbanization, how does solar development, how do all these different impacts on the landscape play a role in those, and how do we develop conservation plans and reserves to ensure their long-term viability. And so, you know, from rosy boas to mountain king snakes to yellow-legged frogs to red-legged frogs, we study all that stuff. My lab does. But additionally, a lot of my PhD work, my thesis work, was in the Pacific, and I studied the evolution of reptiles, in particular in the Pacific Islands, and how they moved around those islands. And so because I'm a research biologist in USGS, I have some flexibility, and all of us have some flexibility to do research that meets important management needs within the Department of Interior and within the US government, but we have some latitude to pick projects. And so what you were talking about earlier, like there are some folks that have really focused on the invasive species in Florida projects, and I don't do that, but they're really focused on that. I focus on some other invasive species projects, like I talked about at Herpeton, the invasive albino king snakes in the Canary Islands, where that's becoming a big issue, and that to me is a project we've kind of gotten behind and are continuing to focus on, because there's a clear link to herpetoculture in that one, and thinking about how do we you know, like there's a lot of rare and endemic lizards in the Canary Islands that we don't want to go see go extinct because of invasive albino king snakes. And so there's a nexus there of conservation, and the king snakes tie back to San Diego because that's where their origin is. So we can learn something from our research in San Diego and potentially inform an eradication event that's in the Canary Islands, but by doing research with those guys and learning from the natural biology of that species in the wild, in the king snakes in the wild, and how we might inform managing them now in the wild in the Canary Islands. So it's a long-winded answer, but USGS does a lot of different kind of science things, and we have a bit of latitude to do different things. The other piece, because I am an expert on lizards in the Pacific, and I've really, and through USGS, I've really focused on kind of invasives in the Pacific that would impact US resources in the Pacific, like whether it's Hawaii or American Samoa. But I also focused on things that are endangered species, like the Fijian iguanas, where Fijian iguanas are listed as a foreign listed species by the US government, by the US Fish and Wildlife Service, the same way we list panda bears or elephants as endangered, as foreign listed species. The iguanas have been listed. And so through that nexus, through the link between you know, being in the Department of Interior and Fish and Wildlife Services Department of Interior, we're supporting them by understanding the biology of the Fijian iguanas and their systematics and their conservation needs, and helping both the Fijian government and then also the US government think about that species and how to recover that species. And so I've focused quite a bit on Fijian iguanas over the last decade or so, with partners in Fiji, and then also partners here like the San Diego Zoo. So I do have this flexibility, and like I said, the goal isn't to. We're not regulators, and nothing I do is regulatory. It's all to kind of understand systems and then give people the data to make decisions. And that's what we do. It's basically, here's what we've learned about this thing. You can decide to put a golf course here or not, but here, if you do put a golf course here, here's what the downstream effect is. Or if you put a gravel mine on top of this glossy snake habitat, here's what might happen to the glossy snakes and the legless lizards and the horn lizards that live in that landscape, because this will be the downstream effect of that decision. Basically, we don't regulate that decision, but we help bring science to that decision process, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of my role at the USGS, and it's exciting because I get to kind of define who those partners are and how we get towards those decisions, if that makes sense.
Have you found that many of those, much of the information is helped stop? It seems like sometimes when a project has a lot of money behind it, they just kind of steamroll whatever happens to be there.
A lot of there's a lot of awareness by groups, like, if you're going to invest in a project to build something, you have a lot of awareness of what the regulatory framework is. And so it's very infrequent that somebody says, I didn't know. Like there's a lot of awareness because people are investing lots of money into these projects. And so they have awareness that they have this regulatory framework that they have to work in that exists because of, these wildlife laws or these other environmental laws. And so they're often prepared to think through what are their options. And so there's a lot of opportunities that I've seen where we can partner with somebody and maybe even help them deliver something that's better than what they thought they were going to deliver, but also get a much more significant conservation gain that we would have gotten if there was a battle over that, if there was a fight over it. And so if that helps answer your question. So I partner, we partner a lot with land use lawyers, with all kinds of different groups to try to meet this. And I also spend a lot of time working on golden eagles. And so golden eagles are what I consider the largest reptile predator in Southern California, because birds are just reptiles. And so we do a lot with golden eagles, and golden eagles really create a lot of hardship for people. And I didn't realize how complex the golden eagle landscape is, and understanding the dynamics of golden eagles and who cares what about golden eagles. But we were brought in because we're really objective, and that's what we do, is we do objective science. And then people can look at that data and say, if I do this, this is what's going to happen to the golden eagles, this pair of eagles, or this community of pairs of eagles, or whatever. And so to me, I feel like it's an important position. It's an important job because I'm doing something that I think is meaningful, down line. But and I don't think that we're necessarily, our role isn't to stop progress in any way. It's just to bring science to the table so that the decisions can be made more honestly and with awareness of what those what might be a response to that issue. Like if you decide to do this, this is what you get. If you decide to do this, this is what your outcome might be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and so that's where it's theory, it really is, like I think we're playing some kind of, I think, important societal role, even though we are the government. And so some people never trust the government about anything, but we are the government, but we're super open about what we're doing and what we've found. And so that people can evaluate that and make decisions about that.
Makes sense. Yeah, I would probably be one of those that's like, I don't. There's not a lot of government trust coming out of this corner. That's for sure. But I mean, at the end of the day, the people who work in the government, the people that live in this country with us too, like yourself, and
Yeah.
it's a big. There's many cogs to the entirety of the U.S. government, and it sounds like your cog is much more based in science and not controlling people or policy.
Right.
You mentioned the golden eagle. That's a pretty impressive animal. You don't see him as much. I feel like I used to see him a bunch as a kid. Um, I saw one last year tacking along the road with us out in the country out here, just like
Yeah.
going right next to it. It was the most amazing thing I had seen in a while. And
You guys have the densest population in the Bay Area, East Bay, in the U.S. There's an area by the wind farms out there that is the densest breeding
oh,
population of
up
golden
north,
eagle
up you said up by the East Bay?
in the East Bay. Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
like up by like Altamont Pass and whatnot, where all
Mhm.
the
Exactly. Altamont's got the densest golden eagle population. This huge population of breeding eagles there. We have very few compared to up there, but yeah,
yeah,
it's
so I'm
pretty.
down here in San Luis Obispo County. I just saw that one, but yeah, when I was born in Hayward, so that's we saw them around there when I was young.
Oh, I thought you said San Jose. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. Yeah,
Um,
I'm definitely familiar with Patterson Pass and the Altamont and
exactly.
that
Yeah,
whole
that
area.
that area is packed. And my background is really I'm a herpetologist. I've always been into herps, always kept herps since I was a kid. So that's where a lot of my research is focused on that. And I didn't expect to be working on birds. We've worked on lions and we've worked on bobcats and a variety of different things as the questions, like we're being asked by partners, like, what do you think about this problem? And then we try to bring science to that problem. And as a scientist, we should be able to, focus on these different taxa, and and I focus on things that I think are more cool, like bobcats and badgers and lions and golden eagles. So I don't focus on a lot of things that are more boring. And then the rest of it's all herps, for the most part. Some endangered mice and rats and stuff, but a lot of it is herps, and that's been my interest in fish. And I grew up in Southern California, just wandering the hillsides and stuff. So I kind of had that sense, and I watched kind of growing up the landscape change. Like driving to college, driving to UCI, all these places I'd go look for king snakes just disappeared. They became houses, and so I saw that change and really decided that that was something I was kind of interested in seeing if I could play a role in informing, let's say, not regulating, but informing. Yeah.
That's it's possibly the best approach to take to anything if you want to change something or make a better change. Then there's so much resistance if you come in trying to tell somebody they can't do something. You almost immediately get an knee-jerk reaction of, well, you can't tell me what to do. But if you just say, hey,
Right.
look at this, and this is why, just look at this and present it that way. I think you probably have found that you've had more success with that, going that route, versus saying, hey, you just can't do this.
And a lot of it's educating people. Like I feel like a lot of my job is to bring awareness to like with politicians in particular, to get them to better understand, because often politicians come, these, when I say politicians, it's like city mayors and stuff that are making a land use decision at a local level. They're being told that this is good, in some way, and it's just kind of getting them some awareness about, well, these are the good parts and these are the bad parts, and here's some ways to maybe think about this project. So I feel like I do a lot of biological education through being in workshops and meetings with folks where I'm bringing my biological expertise to real land use decisions they're making, or real decisions they're making, and helping them think more about how the animals are dealing with the landscape, so they can make educated decisions and stuff. So I don't teach in a college per se, but I'm educating people that have less of an environmental awareness, I think. But I
but
think.
but more of an environmental impact than somebody in college.
Right. Yeah, and so exactly. So that's where I've like spent my last 20 plus years. Even when I was in grad school, I went to lots of meetings and commented on environmental impact reports and stuff, and just really tried to bring my expertise to the table, so that I could try to be, help people think about the decisions they're making. Again, not telling them what decision to make, but helping them think about it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's I mean, there's a lot of people could learn from that technique. I think, help people understand something rather than try to force something down their throats. So much more of a successful way to go about doing things.
Yeah.
So that's cool that you got to do something like that. I mean, you've been into herps your whole life. How did you know Philippe from being down there in Southern California, or?
Well, so Philippe made it clear to me when he were at the Herpeton. Like I didn't like I've known Philippe for decades, but I didn't realize his like he shared a story when we were at Herpeton about how he came to this conference in 1984. It was the summer of 85, and it was the IHS, the International Herp Society meeting, a herp symposium in San Diego, and I helped I helped do part of that conference, and I didn't realize he had came to that conference. So I was in college, but I myself and a friend of mine, Vince Scheit, got a permit from the state to collect all of these different species to bring on display. So we went out and caught collared lizards and chuckwallas and arroyo toads and all these different species, so that the people coming to the IHS, which when it was held in San Diego in 1985, could see all these species, all the diversity we had here in San Diego. So we did a bunch of collecting trips before that, and we're able to bring that and set up all these aquariums so people could take photos of them. So when Philippe said, like, he came to San Diego, California then, and like decided to move from the East Coast then, I was like, I didn't even remember that like, because I knew a lot of people there, but I didn't realize that's probably when I first met Philippe was in that at that meeting in 1985. I already knew Bob Mayu from Sandfire, and I knew I knew a lot of the people at that point, but I hadn't met Philippe, but that's when I first met him. So I've known Philippe for 35 years, probably, well, a really long time. And I wasn't even 20 when I met him. So I was still a teenager when I met Philippe, I think. So I was like 19 maybe when I met him that summer. So I've known him for a long time. And then he, really flourished when he came out to California, partnered with, Mayu early on, and he did a lot of other stuff. And I used to, when I was in high school, I worked with at California Zoological Supply, and then Gary Bagnall, who started ZooMed Laboratories, he first owned that, and I worked with him. So I knew a lot of people in the trade way back in the early 80s, even before I met Philippe. So known him for quite a while.
Yeah, that's a couple years.
Yeah. So I was excited to go to Herpeton, and I just wanted to I had this like you saw, I wanted to make people aware about some of the things I was seeing in the landscape that were maybe having a negative effect, and how do we as a community think about that, like these invasive king snakes, and how do we think about that, because like some of the Canary Island lizards are like spectacular. We don't want to see them go extinct because of the king snakes. And so how do we think about that so we don't have that problem elsewhere,
Yeah, I've waned on this channel for a bit this year. If there was one thing that was the worst outcome, I mean, I feel bad sometimes because I know people have a lot of worse outcomes from COVID. But for me, in my own personal world, the biggest downfall was the second Herpeton not happening.
Yeah, it was pretty, yeah. It was a bummer. I was excited about it, but I also had a conflict, so I wouldn't have been able to make it. So I got kicked off. I thought that was yeah, it's a bummer. I thought the first one was good. They did a great job, and it was fun for me see people I hadn't seen in some cases for a long time.
Yeah, and it just seemed like it was going to be the place, especially the lineup that was coming up for the next year, like to help merge the worlds of academia and government and hobbyists. It just seemed like it was going to be that spot where we could find that common ground, which is reptiles and herpetoculture, and have the different sides of the aisles come together and for the better. And I hope that it sounds like it may have been stopped by COVID. Like it sounded like they're kind of thinking it's not going to happen next year, and this was kind of the year to make it happen. But I hope I hope that it can continue to happen, because like I said, that's what I saw it as, is as this thing where like people like yourself and people that were coming from around the world that work in more of the, because a lot of the community I'm in, the people that I know, I go to the shows, um, are mostly hobbyists and breeders. I don't really know. I know
Right.
a couple people, yeah, a couple of professors, but for the majority, I know mostly hobbyist folks. And I just think there's so much benefit to get these worlds together. Just a huge benefit that if we can merge them as much as possible. Which is why I was super glad that you agreed to come on, because um, I mean, the work you did in Fiji. How did you end up working with the Fijian iguanas
Yeah.
and stuff like that? How,
So what I did, I was so interested in Fijian iguanas. Like I was, so the first time I went to Fiji was in 1984. So the second Fijian iguana was described, the crested iguana was described in 1981. And there was just phenomenal, like that lizard, the plate that was in Journal of Herpetology of that second iguana, and the story behind it, how he found it, John Gibbons found it, and then that it was in Blue Lagoon, like the movie Blue Lagoon, found a second population of it. Like that was, everybody was super interested in Fijian iguanas. You had a couple of people like Hank and Tom Crutchfield that were involved in illicit Fijian iguana stuff, in the early 80s. And so, I mean, even in LA, Brockett and those guys, there's court documents about their issues with Fijian iguanas. So Fijian iguanas have always been this sublime thing that people are really attracted to. And when the second one got described, I was in high school, and I wrote to the author that wrote it, and I said, I really wanted to see him and see these iguanas and learn about them. And so I saved up my money from working, and when I graduated from high school in 1984, I spent the summer in the Pacific, and I bought one of these tickets that was $900, and I can go to 4 places. It was an island hopper, so I went to Hawaii, then I went to Fiji, then I went to Australia, then I went to New Zealand, and then back. And there was a conference in New Zealand that was an Australasian herp conference. And so I was super excited to go and learn all about the Australian herps and see all Australian herps. And so spent the summer doing that trip, and went to Fiji, met John Gibbons, saw all these crazy iguanas he had in his house that were from different islands that, this one's undescribed, and this one, we've only seen once. And it was super like, wow, like this is what I want to do. Like, how did these iguanas get here? Why are they here? And why are they so rare? And so there was a lot of questions then. So then, I was living in Australia I was there for like 6 weeks, and I went to the conference, and then I stayed with this professor from Orange County, this guy Byard Bradstrom, and I stayed at his place for 3 or 4 weeks, where he was on sabbatical, and saw lace monitors and diamond pythons and not frilled dragons. I didn't see those, but I saw bearded dragons, saw tons of like crazy snake neck turtles and all kinds of stuff that was just spectacular. But the Fiji stuff really stood out. Went to New Zealand, saw some of the geckos and skinks there. And then called my parents from New Zealand. I said, I'm going to not go to college. I'm just going to stay here. And then they threatened to throw all my snakes out the window. And my dad did. He's like, you better get on that plane tomorrow. And so I came home. And then I didn't get back to the Pacific until 88. I had an opportunity when I graduated college to live in Fiji for a while. And so then I was really excited about studying the iguanas while I was living down there. And then I realized how rare they really were. And this guy, John Gibbons, had passed away in 1986. And so he was gone, his iguanas were gone. And then there was this gap in knowledge that I was aware of from him, but nobody was doing anything about it. And so nobody was trying to describe those iguanas or understand them. So I tried to work on it then and realized how really difficult it is and how really rare those species are. And then I was not able to get back to iguanas until 2004. I went to Fiji for, I ended up doing my PhD on other geckos in Fiji, but not in the end of the Pacific, but not iguanas. And so it wasn't until 2004 that we got a chance to get down there for this International Iguana Symposium, International Iguana International Iguana Foundation and the Iguana Specialist Group from IUCN had a workshop there to develop a recovery plan for the Fijian iguanas. And so then learned a lot more about them from an Australian that was working on them and from the Fijian teams, and then started really partnering with the Fijians and the Australians and really started a research program. And that led to describing a third iguana from Fiji in 2008, we described the Brachylophus bula bula. And then in 2017, we described a fourth species of iguana. So in that decade plus, we've doubled the diversity of iguanas in Fiji. And I've got another four species we're going to describe. And so they really started when I was in college or even when I graduated high school, but I've kind of carried that passion for working on the Fijian iguanas and understanding them kind of through to now. And I'm still never bored of working on Fijian iguanas and going down there and exploring and working with the government down there really to try to think about how to protect them. And that's where, like you heard me talk at Herpeton, where we're working at cross purposes with some of these wildlife traffickers where, that they've directly told me, well, we're saving them by taking them to Europe and now Uganda and raising them because the Fijians can't take care of them. And I'm like, well, we're working directly with the Fijians to eradicate threats on those islands to make more iguanas so they don't have to be listed and endangered. So it's really kind of brought me a lot more recent awareness of the wildlife trafficking trade and their role in potentially impacting our ability to actually conserve some of these species that are pretty enigmatic and we're really interested in. So I've been super excited about it. And Fijian iguana stuff is just
what do you think it is about the Fijian iguana? Like you mentioned, Crutchfield and molt. Like there seems like there's been this crazy interest by
forever
scientists for decades.
It's I don't really know. Like I've talked to Hank about it maybe a decade ago. I talked with him about it a little bit, and I met Hank back in the 80s when I was so I knew him a long time ago. Same with Crutchfield. I didn't really know Crutchfield well, but I knew him because he dealt with Kalzu. And there's just certain species that stand out that have always been, these like species that people are drawn to more than others, and that's been one of them. Maybe shingleback skinks is another. There's a handful of species that just kind of are enigmatic enough, or there's something just, I don't know if it's primitive about them or what it is that really bring more attention to them, I think, if that makes sense.
They're certainly a gorgeous species, and they're not something that, are you even able to keep them legally in the U.S.? I don't.
No,
you're not.
They're not, because they're all CITES Appendix 1. But like for me growing up, San Diego Zoo had them, so I would always see them at the zoo, and they've had them almost constant since the 60s. They've had Fijian iguanas, and so they've had a long-term program for them, and so it's just they're pretty spectacular animal, but because people can't have them, that's what makes them more valuable or whatever.
That's all.
It's
that always
black-headed pythons or Ramsey's python, things that when they weren't available, people wanted them more, Angolan pythons. There's a whole series of snakes that, because one after another, they kind of slowly showed up in the trade. But back then, I remember the first time I saw a black-headed python in the mid 80s or the 80s, it was just spectacular to see one, and nobody was breeding them then. But yeah, then Fijian iguanas are still like that because they're still not something you can have, so that drives this, something it's more sublime about it. Like it makes it, you want it more in some cases because you can't have it.
Oh, absolutely. That's true. That's true of just about everything in life, I think, for people. What are they having success with breeding them there at San Diego?
Yeah, they've been breeding them for decades. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, for the Fijian iguanas, yeah, they've been breeding them for decades. And one of the early parts of the question, and that's why San Diego was involved, was they were breeding them, but they had weird looking iguanas. And so we were trying to figure out like, what are the iguanas they have? And it turns out that they have multiple potentially undescribed species that have been hybridized together over time. Because some of the iguanas they have were smugglers brought them from somewhere, they got confiscated, ended up at the San Diego Zoo. And so they do these outbreeding, you know, in zoos, this the normal way where you're breeding, you're trying to get good genetic representation of your stock. And so you're doing outbreeding. And in doing that, if you have undescribed species, then you're hybridizing them. And so we, one of the first drivers in some of the Fijian work was to understand what the diversity of genetics was in Fiji. So, and then contrasting that to what's in the zoos. So in doing that, we could see that there were potential hybrids between multiple undescribed species that are now in the US zoo population of Fijian iguanas.
Do you see them ever being something that you're able to keep in the hobby and potentially breed? If that was possible, do you think that would be a good thing or a bad thing for the species?
I think that we can recover the iguanas, and I think that's like the real first step is to and that's kind of like we did some captive breeding in Fiji. We have two populations we had done with partners with our resorts and then also with Kula Eco Park, different captive breeding experiments. And what we found in both cases, both of the islands where those guys are from, that the iguanas will do better if we take away stressors and threats than they are if you breed them in captivity. And so we had captive populations, and then we also had animals that were still in the wild in those islands. And we removed cats and rats on one island area. And then on the other island, we removed rats and goats. There were no cats. And in both cases, the animals that were left in the wild, the iguanas, did much better. They produced more offspring than doing the captive breeding. And so to me, that said, we need to get larger populations of these iguanas on more islands, and that captive breeding and bringing them off the islands is less successful than taking the stressors off the islands, removing the cats and the rats. And I think once you get any kind of recovery that's real and measurable, then questions about trade and all these other things can come up. But right now, I think our experiments have showed that captive breeding is less good than removing the stresses, and that removing the stresses has been phenomenal. Like we really went from at this Malolo, from not being able to find iguanas to now finding a bunch in a given kind of night survey, because their numbers are really increasing. And so I think it's showing that kind of progress to try to get towards recovery of those species.
The habitat protection and removal of invasive species
yeah, exactly. And that's where it's hard for us to even publicize that, because when we publicize it, then people go and steal the iguanas. And I say steal the iguanas because they're actually, we're using them for something. It's the same way somebody came into your house and stole your snakes. They're stealing them. You're using those for something. You're trying to breed those snakes. And so I kind of view this Fijian iguana thing in a personal way, because we're working with those iguanas on that island. And if you come from, let's say, Uganda or Europe, and you take those away, you're stealing them from us, and you're not harvesting wild animals, you're stealing our recovery program. And that's where I've become more kind of impassioned about that after interacting with a couple of people directly in Fiji about it, and hearing their perspectives on why they feel they should take them to other places and breed them there. And anyway, it's a different concept when you think about it like that. Like, you're actually stealing something we're trying to do. It's no different than stealing from anybody else. You're stealing our animals that we're trying to
Sure,
recover.
sure. And you're trying to,
Yeah,
and you're just trying to recover. It's not. It's a little more, um, not bold. It's a little more honorable than just a breeding project you got in your house. You're trying to repopulate the wild population. It's
yeah, and once you get those, once you meet those metrics, then other things might be possible, but you've got to meet those metrics first, and we're actively working on that, and that's different than a trade in you know species from Thailand or somewhere else where they're being harvested, and there's some sustainability or not, but they're not somebody's program. Like we're actually trying to recover those animals. So anyway, it's and that's kind of what I talked about at the Herpeton a bit, and to me that became much more personal when somebody's going to a place where we're actively doing something and taking those, and then they're telling me that they're doing us a favor by taking them to Uganda when I don't know what that favor is. Like it's not, it's just taking away from those breeders that we are trying to have produce more eggs for us. The same way anybody else would be wanting them to produce more eggs. So
sure.
it's weird, right?
Yeah, it is. It is interesting. Speaking of doing favors for stuff, there's a thought out there that, and I like to think this too. Like when we're teaching people about these animals, like going to the educational programs for the kids and stuff, and showing people who didn't know about the animals that having them in captivity to show them to people is one way to open their minds and make it real for them to help lead to habitat protection. Just having that awareness.
Yeah, for
Kind of like
sure.
what you guys do. You guys do that with what you're doing with USGS. You're doing that there. So
yeah, we have captive snakes at the office. I have captive pets here, and the ones at the office we do educational stuff and take them and make people aware about if you're about the native snakes down there. And the thing with captive breeding, it does take pressure off of wild populations and harvesting wild populations, and having like the albino cow kings is like nobody needs to harvest cow kings anymore because there's more cow kings than we ever need. And so like to me there's a lot of benefit to having ranching or breeding, but that's different than when we're actively working on recovery of something. And
oh sure.
and, yeah. But I think the educational awareness piece is super important, and that's kind of what we view the captive Fijian iguanas at the US zoos as. They're kind of ambassadors because they're not going to ever go back to Fiji, but if we have them at the Dallas Zoo and the National Zoo and Sacramento Zoo and a variety of other zoos where we can tell a story, LA Zoo, about the iguanas, and then potentially raise some funding for the Fijian team, the Fijian government, through that awareness in the US, so that they can invest that money in their ranger program and their invasive animal program to help save that species. And that's a real valuable piece to that conservation puzzle.
Absolutely. We got about 10 minutes left here. I want to turn this over to our live audience. If anybody in the live chat has a question for Robert before we go to our Q&A in the Zoom afterwards, throw them up. No, I will. I touched it. And it lost its link to the live stream, but I think it's back.
Oh, no.
It didn't like that. It was such a high information packed conversation so far. They didn't want me to touch it. I felt it too. I've been sitting back here like, don't touch anything. Just let it happen. Just don't touch anything. I literally all I did was change windows, and it didn't like it. I knew it.
Hopefully I'm not on too many soapboxes when I was talking. Yeah.
No, I don't think so. No, definitely not. I'm very interested. Do you have plans to go? I mean, I know travel is a little bit interesting, especially internationally right now. When was the last time you were in Fiji?
Not this year, but 2019 September. I was there for a little over 2 weeks, and we were working on the recovery plan. And we did actually, luckily, we were able to go and visit a bunch of the project sites before the not knowing that COVID was coming. We were able to go see a bunch of the sites and and really talk about some of the needs at some sites. And just recently, one of our project areas, Yando Atamba, where the crested iguanas are, got hammered by this cyclone, this tropical cyclone Yasa, and the ranger that lives out there, his house got destroyed. The office for the National Trust got destroyed. Like most of the village got destroyed. And so we've been doing the last month or so, trying to help figure out some fundraising to get them some resources to rebuild. So it's been over a year, which is a bummer because this last year we had a couple of big trips we were planning, and we're still going to islands to do discovery down there. So we don't know how many iguanas there still are, and this last year was hoping to hit a couple of new areas, and so that's on hold for I have no idea how long. Yeah, it's a bummer.
It's just kind of in limbo right now as to when the next time you're
everything. Yeah, everything is. I have we have one program on dry forest restoration that hopefully will go forward soon. One of my staff will hopefully be down there in the next few months to work with Ahura Resorts and the Fijian government on we're regrowing forest in an area that had been burned and degraded and was grasslands, and that forest recovery is really helping the Fijian iguanas. They're doing spectacular there. The forest is growing super fast, and so we're hoping to get that back on that program relatively soon, and then to highlight it a bit more so we can try to expand it. Because a lot of times, nobody really grows forest for iguanas. They grow forest for birds or orchids or whatever. And so getting people to invest in iguana conservation is a lot harder than you'd think. People.
No,
it's a lot harder.
As much as we are in a little bubble in herpetoculture of a big group of people who love and appreciate reptiles, I'm very aware that we are the minority of the population of the world. So
there's the same biases you see on herpetoculture, like as somebody that keeps snakes or whatever. Those biases exist in conservation. Like why, the money doesn't go to snake conservation. It doesn't go to lizard conservation. It goes to tortoises some and the frogs some, but it really goes to birds and great apes and rhinos and hippo, stuff like that, pandas. They get the real money. And if there's any money left, it's very little, and we've been trying to buy an island in Fiji that might become a resort in the future, but it's got its own endemic iguana, and it's only like $2 million, and people just roll their eyes, like they're not going to spend $2 million to buy an island in Fiji. But you think California, $2 million is nothing. People are spending, like you think about how much people spend on a house in California, and
even a car sometimes.
Yeah, and yet to raise that kind of money to buy a 100-acre island is been impossible. And we've been working on that for the last 5-6 years, and it's so unreachable. But if there was a really rare parrot there, it would be like nothing, or a rare monkey. So there really is these societal biases against reptiles, the same way you see it in herpetoculture, the same way it is in conservation.
Well, I just had started doing some educational programs last year and was just getting into them, taking over from my buddy Brown Fowler, who ran Roaming Reptiles here in California for a while. So I'm hoping to. I've got my first show actually finally since COVID has hit next weekend, not this coming weekend, but the weekend after. And after talking with you, I had never really talked about it too much before, but I'm going to try and incorporate it more and more into the program, is to speak about things like that and the habitat. And the idea of what you just said, like people are so willing to save a parrot, but not so much a lizard, even though they're just as important, if not more important sometimes.
Right.
You actually answered somebody's question in the chat without even knowing it, about the island that you guys are working on purchasing. And he was also wondering, Elliot, he was also wondering what happened to the rich poacher that was stealing the iguanas.
He's still living in Uganda. You can see videos online of him breeding marine iguanas at his place. Yeah, he's it's a battle. I mean, a battle meaning like uh, uh, some people are going to try to drive a trade in species. We're trying to, like, I don't believe there needs to be a trade in that species at the moment, just because we're actively trying to work to save them. And it's like plowshare tortoises and stuff like that, where they're just so rare, and there's a handful of people that are really working with them. To go and steal some of those tortoises is, it really puts everything back, and you can try to justify that you're going to save them because you can breed them better than they can, but really it's about money, and it's not about you caring about that species. It's about, there's plenty of other species that are super cool in a herp community you can work with. You don't have to work with the ones who are actively trying to save. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, we're doing it, you've talked to us, just, you don't need to do that. And in my mind, but no, there's, it's very rare you ever hear of any poachers getting arrested, right? It's, when it is, it's spectacular. 500 reptiles taken in, in a house in Spain or something, but it's not that often that people are really, are really arrested, because
It's got to be something that's going to make some politician's career or some agent's career or something. And
it really is. It's because it's a lot of work to prove that they broke all these laws, and people are smart, and some people have been doing this for decades, so they know how to kind of work through the system. For us, like I said, it's just work with us, and let's try to, let's try to save the species. So anyway,
and do the right thing. No, well, I hear you 100%, Robert. I can tell that you're very, very, very passionate about it, and I think you're being very calm and collected right now. I can tell how you feel about the it's kind of it's your baby, taking care of this, and you've put a lot of work in, and it's very important to you. It's obvious.
Yeah. And it's hard work. I mean, it's hard to, like I said, to raise money to go and do this stuff, and so
yeah,
got good partners, so that's good.
Well, we appreciate you, man, and I appreciate you're gonna stick around for a little bit so we can do a little Q&A afterwards. But if there's anything you'd like to tell our public audience before we get out of here, go for it.
Yeah, no, like I said, I grew up keeping herps. I still have herps straight outside, and so it's a fun thing to do. I've been able to kind of make a career out of it. So, like, in a different way. So I think it's just kind of doing what you're passionate about, and trying to kind of stick with it. So, like I said, I've been doing this since I was, a kid with the herps and stuff. And so it's fun. And it's fun to go see everybody at Herpeton and kind of get a chance to kind of see how the community's changed over time. And so I'm hoping that kind of continues forward, the next year, whenever we get together again, and hopefully kind of bring, societal awareness and just kind of some responsibility. And it doesn't mean you can't do things. It's just thinking about what you're doing and thinking about how you're doing it, and how we might do things better or whatever. But yeah, even right here, I have a little Herpeton thing that I use to hide my camera. I just realized there's a little Herpeton postcard from last year sitting there on my desk. That was fun.
That was fun, man. Well, I appreciate you having the time to come on here and talk with us. I know the people in the audience have really appreciated it. There's been many comments saying it's a great interview, lots of great information, and people really appreciate it. So thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Great.
Made that little thing pop up again. All right, guys, I know that little thing keeps popping up in my intros. My little cousin is coming here this week, and he's gonna help me figure this stuff out, so I don't need to mess with buttons while I'm trying to have a nice conversation with the guests we have on. But Robert did a great job, and I'm super appreciative of him for coming on and sharing his knowledge with us, and his passion for the species and the Fiji iguanas and everything like that. I'm hoping that we can get more of the folks that were at Herpeton to come on to these, so we can have the discussions that I was really hoping to have at Herpeton, and do them here on the live stream for you guys to listen to and be able to ask your questions as well. because I don't know, I think it's really beneficial. But I appreciate all you guys coming on the stream. Next week we've got Aurora Exotics coming on, and until then, you've been watching Triple B TV. You guys take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I know there's a lot of you looking for an update on the Indigo Snake that's coming out tomorrow on the vlog channel, so you can check it out there. You guys have yourselves a great evening.